You know what's funny? And by funny, I mean like finding out that aliens visited Earth and we completely missed it. It's funny, but after spending weeks on a deep dive into Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker, the film, the ideas, the metaphysical wilderness, coming back to Roadside Picnic, the novel that inspired it, feels like crawling out of a dream and into a scrapyard, or maybe a dumpster fire. And I mean that in the best possible way. Because Roadside Picnic isn't Tarkovsky's mystical art house meditation. It's much scrappier and much leaner. It wishes it had the time to swan about the zone looking for mythical rooms to grant wishes. Instead, it's just trying to get into the zone, collect some alien trash, and get the hell out again without losing a limb. It's very much of its time. It was written in 1972, you know, back in the good old days when the Russians were the bad guys and the biggest existential threat was nuclear annihilation instead of... In any case, Roadside Picnic, written by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky in 1972, isn't Tarkovsky's dream poem. It's grimy, it's sarcastic, and it's more materialist than a Kardashian's Instagram feed. It's about alien contact, or rather the complete and utter lack of alien contact. No cute ET phone home moments, no Independence Day speeches, no Marvel multiverse nonsense, thank God. Just garbage. Literal alien trash. And somehow that's far more terrifying than any CGI monster Disney could dream up. So buckle up for this, our first episode of Philosophical Book Club, because we're about to explore why getting ghosted by aliens might be the most profound philosophical statement of the 20th century. So first, the setup. In Roadside Picnic, the Earth has experienced something called the visitation. 6 locations that were briefly and inexplicably touched by an alien presence. Then they left. Just like that time years ago when my dad went to the corner store to get some cigarettes. So they're coming back, right? And in their wake, they left a mess of unexplainable phenomena and strange objects behind, the zones, which our protagonist and stalker, Redrick Red Stewart, covertly infiltrates and navigates. And the chapters of the book basically trace his journeys with one exception. They start with him when the zones are reasonably new, and they go all the way to a decade or so later. There's a chapter in the middle that we'll talk about, which is actually from the perspective of one of the other characters in the book and has a critical conversation, and that I talked about in the Stalker, the film video, which is with Dr. Valentine Pillman and his theory about what the zones are. But that's pretty much it for the book. And here's your fair warning, there's going to be spoilers ahead, including for the end of the book. And let's just take a minute to talk about different editions of the book, because there is the original one that was released under heavy Soviet censorship, and there is the re-released full version, unedited, with a commentary by the authors, which is really worth picking up and reading, because it's quite a different book in some respects. I have the very fancy Folio Society limited edition here, and that's not because I'm sponsored by the Folio Society, although call me Folio, but mainly because if I put it in this video, I think it's a tax deduction, and I have a problem. So that's the bare bones of the plot. But what does all of this mean? Well, that's really easy because it means nothing. But also, that's kind of terrifying. Now let's pause here for a minute, because already the Strugatskys are doing something radically different from most science fiction. They're not interested in a first contact narrative in the classical sense. There's no alien civilization trying to communicate, no take me to your leader, no galactic message in a bottle. Instead, what they give us is a universe that is brutally silent. As Dr. Valentine Pillman says in the book, and I'm paraphrasing here because copyright lawyers are scarier than anything found in the zone, the aliens didn't come to meet us. It was more like a roadside picnic. They stopped, they had a break, they left their garbage, and they moved on. You know, like that scene in Mad Men. except that it's not Don Draper, it's some terrifying superintelligence. The metaphor is the conceptual atom bomb at the centre of this novel, because it frames humanity not as the object of alien curiosity or as equal players in a cosmic game, but as ants, stumbling through the radioactive residue of a picnic they'll never understand. And that's not just bleak, it's anti-anthropocentric. And if you watch my video on Stalker, you might remember how I argued that the zone in Tarkovsky's film operates as kind of a sacred space, a metaphysical mirror, a place where desire and memory are made real for human beings. On one reading, the room offers something like spiritual grace, even if it's elusive or corrupting or ultimately unknowable. But in Roadside Picnic, the zone is not sacred. It is not your friend. It's an accident. It's a spill. It's a site of contamination, not revelation. And that's the first philosophical shift of this novel. Not transcendence, but absurdity. Not mystery as invitation, but mystery as garbage. And what about that garbage? And let's talk about the junk, because it too is interesting and a big feature of the novel that isn't in the film. Because the Strugatsky zone is littered with strange artifacts. We've got space cells, which sound like something a certain billionaire would name his next product, as well as black sprays, empties, and my personal favourite, hell slime. Because you know your day is going badly when hell slime is an actual inventory item. And as we find out when the story progresses, it does exactly what it says on the tin. So, some of this junk is useful, some of it is deadly, and all of it is borderline incomprehensible. And the way humanity deals with them is fascinating. We do what we always do when faced with the seemingly inexplicable. We make money out of it, because there's a black market. Sure, there are scientists trying to make sense of it all, ostensibly for the common good of humanity, but there are also stalkers like Red, our book's anti-hero, who go into the zone illegally to retrieve items for profit, for desperation, or just because they can't help themselves. Later on in the book, it even becomes cool, and all of the kids try to become stalkers and do it and get themselves killed. And here's where we can bring in a little philosophy and a little Martin Heidegger, who's made a few appearances on this channel. Because in his masterwork, Being and Time, Heidegger distinguishes between tools that are ready to hand and those that are present at hand, or Vorhandenheit and Zuhandenheit, if you want to be really fancy. And the example that Martin Heidegger uses to show the difference between the two is using a simple hammer. Because when we use a hammer smoothly, when we're banging away at that nail and really hitting it on the head, it feels like it's a part of our body. It feels like it's an extension of our arm. The hammer recedes from our awareness. It's ready to hand, or Zuhandenheit in Martin Heidegger's terms. But when it breaks, when it becomes an object of attention, suddenly we're looking at it and it's a thing in the world. It shows up as present at hand, or Vorhandenheit, kind of estranged from us. Heidegger thinks that we, as beings in the world, encounter everything in the world this way. It's fundamental to how we are and how we experience the world as meaningful for Dasein. That's his term for us, for the beings that we are. For Heidegger, it would be inconceivable if the things that we encounter in this world don't fall into one of those categories or another, ready at hand or present at hand. But that's exactly what the characters encounter in Roadside Picnic. The alien artifacts in the novel kind of short-circuit this dynamic completely. They're not tools at all. They're not in any intentional human-directed sense. They're not for us. They have effects, sure, but no assigned purpose. They don't reveal a world or open up a space of meaningful action. They're just pure, obscure presence, in a sense more radical than Heidegger could ever have imagined. They're objects that resist a kind of worlding altogether. And this is terrifying because it suggests a kind of post-human ontology, a universe full of things that work, that do, that burn, that heal and distort, but without any reference to us, with reference to something completely alien and incomprehensible entirely. Or in other words, a universe full of things that not only doesn't care about our dumb opinions, but doesn't even need to know they exist. And for a YouTube video essayist, that's chilling. It's the flip side of humanism, And in terms of genre, the Strugatsky brothers' Roadside Picnic inaugurates a kind of new strain of book in science fiction, the hardcore sci-fi, which is less interested in the fun human elements of the future and more interested in the cold, hard alien determinism of a universe with horizons we can never glimpse. Their groundbreaking novel leads to future sci-fi classics like Blindside by Peter Watts, which is a great book, or A Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge, which is also a great book. Tarkovsky's Stalker gave us a zone that, for all its terror, felt kind of designed, or at least responsive to us. It had a room that answered our desires. But the Strugatskys give us entropy, systems with no interface, a world where tools don't explain themselves and never will. At best, the humanity of Roadside Picnic is kind of a cargo cult. It's collecting the advanced objects that wash up on the shore and then pasting them into a hilariously primitive mosaic. But at worst, we're left with broken toys and the knowledge that out there, at the edges of space, lurks a dark god that could squash us without a single thought. That's not just a narrative shift, it's an epistemic crisis. But the book has political resonance too. And as I mentioned in the video on Stalker, it's no mistake that these merciless materialist takes on the world were produced at the height of the Soviet Union. The Strugatskys looked at alien contact and thought, you know what this needs? More class warfare. But one of the most compelling aspects of Roadside Picnic, and I think this is a key difference from Stalker, is its ruthless materialism. Red, our protagonist, is not a seeker like the stalker in the film. He's not on a spiritual journey. He's a working class criminal. He drinks too much, he's violent, and he's often repulsive. Hey! But here's the thing. Red is one of the few people who actually knows how the zone works. Not because he's special, but because he's willing to risk his neck while the fancy scientists stay safely in their labs and their ivory towers, probably, sipping tea and making theories. The good life. But there's a Marxist undercurrent here, and it's not subtle. The state tries to control the zone through scientific institutions, but knowledge here is a form of power. It's hoarded and it's deployed through class structures, and the scientists, the so-called elites, don't risk their lives for this, or at least one does in the first chapter of the book, but we'll quickly see what happens to him, and it's not great. The stalkers do risk their lives, and what they bring back is immediately commodified. The junk of an alien world becomes a source of capitalist speculation and state surveillance. You want to get rich quick? Well, in the book, you risk your life for something you don't understand. That's the deal. And what happens to all of this dangerous alien tech once it's retrieved? Well, it gets turned into capitalism's newest product line. And there's a tragic irony in that. Because unlike Tarkovsky's Stalker, where the journey was psychological or metaphysical, a very personal journey, the Strugatskys show how even the unknowable gets folded into the logic of the market. You don't need to understand the zone, you just need to be able to sell it. Which raises a brutal question. Is meaning something that we seek or something that we sell? So let's talk about the wish. There is in Roadside Picnic a version of the room, or at least a proto-room. It's never quite named that, but it's a golden sphere in the most dangerous part of the zone that supposedly grants a person's wish. And notice that the twist of Tarkovsky's Stalker isn't present here. The sphere of Roadside Picnic does grant your straightforward, articulated wish and not necessarily your deepest wish or your heart's desire. It's less a cursed monkey paw like Tarkovsky wanted and more just your vanilla monkey paw. And Red gets to the sphere in the final chapter of the book, or perhaps he does. It ends just slightly before he touches it. But here's the novel's unique twist. Because earlier in the book, another stalker named Burbridge goes to this spot and asks for his son's life to be saved. The wish is granted, but his other son dies in a horrific accident soon after. And this son accompanies Red on the trip to the sphere. And as I highlighted in Stalker, it becomes pretty clear how Burbridge actually gets those wishes granted. Somebody has to be sacrificed. Somebody actually has to go through the path and the meat grinder first and essentially be killed for the stalker that follows them to be able to make it to the sphere and make a wish. And so Red, basically, without Burbridge's knowledge, takes along his precious son, and the son is sent first and is sacrificed. It's a cruel twist. But it also leads to some of Red's hesitation, because the son is naive and he talks about, happiness for mankind and all of the things that he would wish for that would be better for the world and for the universe. So Red hesitates. He's not sure what he wants. He's not sure what the zone wants. And this is where the novel kind of echoes Dostoevsky, particularly the brothers Karamazov, because there's that same suspicion that no amount of happiness is worth the suffering of a single child, or a son that gets killed in this case. And Red's daughter, born deformed after years of exposure to the zone effects, embodies that dilemma too. So when Red finally reaches the golden sphere, what does he wish for? What does he say? We just hear him say, "Happiness for everybody, free, and no one will go away unsatisfied." And it's devastating. Because it's not noble. It's a hollow statement. He's parroting words from the son he's just sacrificed that he doesn't believe because he doesn't know what else to do. Because an entity like the sphere or the genie's lab, things like that shouldn't exist. That kind of power shouldn't exist. And the ethics of struggling with that kind of power, as well as the desire of what you might really want to do with it, is overwhelming. Power of that nature shouldn't exist. And if it does, it shouldn't be wielded by humanity who, let's be honest, doesn't have the best track record dealing with these kinds of doomsday devices and lopsided power dynamics. Tarkovsky, in his masterpiece, turns this moment into a kind of spiritual crisis from which all three of the film's characters abstain. But the Strugatskys leave it as ethical despair, and we get no closure on what Red actually wishes for. Because when you no longer know what to want, or who might suffer because of your wanting, you're no longer a hero, you're a haunted animal. And that pretty much is a description of post-Fordist capitalism, at least as the Strugatskys kind of saw it. So, what's at the philosophical core of Roadside Picnic? Simple. We're already living in it. We're already living in the aftermath of the zones. It's not about hope. It's not about meaning. It's about living with the aftermath, the debris, the aftermath of contact, the aftermath of technology, and the aftermath of a bottomless kind of wanting, the kind of wanting that certain forms of capitalism stoke over and over again. And also think about it. We are surrounded by technology we don't understand, algorithms that control what we see, what we buy, who we date even. We carry devices that can access all of human knowledge, but we mostly use them to watch cat videos. Which, nothing against cat videos, I love them. We live in systems designed by people we'll never meet, optimized for goals we didn't choose, running on a logic we often can't quite follow. So, congratulations, you're already a stalker. The only difference is that our zone doesn't have cool sci-fi artifacts. It has targeted ads and terms of service agreements longer than most novels. Where Tarkovsky's zone was a mirror of the soul, mysterious but somehow responsive to human desire, the Strugatsky zone is more like, well, our reality. Roadside Picnic asks us to think of the zone as a wasteland and as waste, as pure remainder, as the stuff left over when intelligence no longer cares. It's there, it does things, and whether those things make sense to you is entirely your own problem. You're on your own. In other words, it's a philosophy of debris, of living in the leftover spaces of systems too big to comprehend. And maybe that's the most honest vision we've got. For a book from 1972, it's a pretty postmodern one. I think we'd all understand, after over 100 years of relentless consumerism, why some might choose to view the world this way. And perhaps the Strugatskys' philosophical argument, if they were here to make it today, might be that the contact has already happened, because we are already surrounded by strange technologies we fully don't understand, operating within systems that no longer served us, shaped by algorithms we didn't write and can't opt out of. Perhaps we're already living in the zone, with all of the danger that entails. And the question, as Red learns, isn't whether you find meaning in the zone. The question is whether you'll survive your commute. So that's it for our inaugural episode of Philosophical Book Club. And thanks for watching, fellow stalkers. And don't worry, there's quite a few more of these bangers of novels for book clubs to come. If this video made you question the nature of reality and also capitalism, congratulations. You've just experienced philosophy. It's like therapy, but with more Russian literature and fewer comfortable chairs. If you want the full Tarkovsky experience, all the spiritual crises, none of the radiation poisoning, then check out our Stalker video. But otherwise, thanks for watching. And until next time, be wise and be kind and be careful what you wish for.